Hey, welcome to the Raptors Weekly Podcast, the last one of the season. All the other ones going forward will pertain to playoffs and everything around that. There'll be extra podcasts involved too, but this is the last one where we're talking, there'll be a bit of playoff stuff sprinkled in, of course, but mostly regular season, kind of capping off what has happened here. And to do it with me, it's tough to think of anybody who would be better at doing it, because Joe Wolfond, feature writer over at The Score, also a co-host of Pound the Rock podcast. He does NBA and tennis features for The Record. And I tell you what, he wrote a piece at the start of the year that so well encapsulated how the Raptors find success. He was the first person to do it. Many people caught on later. Many things were written about it, but he was the first one to do it. And he's written wonderful things about the NBA at large. And he's based out of Toronto. So, of course, he's kind of connected to the Raptors in that way. You've heard him on here many times. Hopefully enjoyed the conversations. You're getting another one today. Joe, how in the hell are you, dude?
I'm fantastic, man. That was such a nice intro. I appreciate it. And I will, send some good vibes back your way, because I feel like since we last did this, you've just caught fire, man. Like you got the gig at Yahoo. You were featured on The Void with Kevin O'Connor, spreading the gospel of Pascal on the Bill Simmons podcast network, as you said. So kudos to you as well, man.
And most importantly, David Thorpe stamped me as somebody who knows basketball
right
after going on Blake's show and talking to him like he didn't.
Yeah. Once you can get Blake to actually be nice to you online, then I'll know you've really made it.
Well, no, Thorpe is the intermediary. He told Blake, yeah, do you know this about basketball? Surely you don't. But then he stamped me. So Blake, he wouldn't be envious. It was just kind of funny because it fuels the fires between Blake and I. But this isn't about Blake and I. This is about the Raptors. And I tell you what, Joe, I want to ask you the first thing. Cliff notes, the Raptors' success, 48 wins this season. They were not, very few people saw them winning that much. The money certainly wasn't there. And they did it. What are the biggest motivating factors you think that caused this outcome?
I think a lot of it is the piece you alluded to that I wrote early on in the season, them just absolutely dominating the possession game to an extent very few teams in history ever have, doing it with a sense of intentionality, which I think you and I have, we both talked about it being kind of surprising and unique, sort of reverse engineering it, like taking, Nick Nurse on record saying, we want to get to +5 in shooting possessions, and sort of working backwards from there, and getting to that number, and actually far exceeding that number in a way that it may not have been wholly organic, but it's undeniably worked, right? Like they are unbelievable on the offensive glass, and they can go up against like these behemoth teams, right? Like teams that are ostensibly bigger than them in the front court. And it doesn't seem to matter whether it's just because of their aggressiveness or their sense of timing. A guy like Scotty Barnes, he makes really good reads. He has a wicked second jump. I mean, I don't entirely know how to explain it, but they're a wonderful offensive rebounding team. And they force a shit ton of turnovers. And that obviously goes into, a lot of different aspects of their defensive scheme, but that is very much by design. Like that is, among other things, like that is what their defensive scheme is designed to do, is to turn the other team over. They do that exceptionally well. And then, you look at the offensive side of things, and they themselves are a very low turnover team. And you take all those factors, and what do you get? You get very many games in which they just get a ton more shooting possessions than their opponents. And that has helped them to this 48-win season, despite the fact that I haven't actually gone through to look, but I would wager more than half their games, and maybe even many more than half their games, like they're coming out with a worse effective field goal percentage than the team they're playing against. Like they're 28th in the league in 2-point percentage, 20th in 3-point percentage, and somehow they won 48 games. I mean, it's borderline miraculous if you think about it.
Okay, and so just since you're the guy, what allows them to access this play style?
I mean, length is a big part of it. Speed, Obviously it requires a measure of connectivity on defense that we have seen slip at points in the season. Not really lately. That's very much tightened up, but I'm sure people will remember, like, before the new year, there was like a month where they were one of the worst defensive teams in basketball because this high wire kind of helter skelter defensive scheme that they were trying to play with frankly, a bunch of new and inexperienced players was just springing a lot of leaks. But I think they nailed that connectivity down in the back half of the season. And they just have all these tremendous athletes and also, like, obviously just really heady players who can pick things up relatively quickly. I think like Thaddeus Young is a good example of that, right? Like, I remember the first 2 or 3 games watching him just thinking, man, Thad is out here just trying to play normal defense. And honestly, I swear there were a couple possessions where he was like looking around, literally throwing his hands up in the air, wondering how he wound up in this frenetic rotation again. And, credit to him. He picked it up. He figured out how to make it work. And I think obviously, Pascal, I think, is a huge component of that, and his ability to just sort of cover ground and close space. Fred, in terms of just like digging down on drives and on post-ups, the sticky hands, like Gary Trent, the ultimate low floor, high ceiling defender, where it's just like there's constantly like a risk reward calculus there. And I think he probably comes out on the reward side of things. I think he's on the positive side of the ledger on the whole this season, which is kind of crazy given the risks that he takes. But yeah, I mean, it is personnel driven, so it's not totally inorganic, even though I think the word that we've used in the past to describe it is jerry rigging, where like they're really just trying to get to this outcome without necessarily just letting it play out naturally. But they do have the personnel to make it work. And I mean, I don't know, like it's maybe a bit tacky and trite to say, but like they play really hard. They play with a lot of energy. And I think they can kind of just wear teams down sometimes with like seriously, you guys have like 2 or 3 guys crashing the offensive glass again. Like, can you just back off and let us get a defensive rebound? I think there is something to it where they just play their asses off, and they got a lot of guys with high motors. They have a lot of clearly extremely well-conditioned athletes, because these guys aren't just playing a really aggressive style of defense and a style of offense that requires them to be in transition more than I think any team in the league, possibly with the exception of Memphis. So they're running a ton on defense and running a ton on offense, and they're playing in some cases like 38 minutes a game. I don't think a lot of teams could actually pull that off. So that's a credit, obviously, to the coaching staff, but it's first and foremost just a credit to the players for being able to do it.
It is incredible. I sent this meme to Lewis. I can't remember exactly when, but it's that famous Kobe meme where it says pass, just get the rebound. And I edited Nick Nurse's face on it because it was like rebounding on offense is the new passing, because the Raptors have the worst assist percentage in the NBA. And they're just like, we'll just throw it off the bucket and, see who grabs it. It's effectively an assist the way that they've formatted their offense. And it's so interesting to watch a team, as you say, like bust their ass, run around everywhere. And then you look at pace, they are at a crawl. They play incredibly slow, and finding a team that hits all the marks that you said, which they do, that also plays at this incredibly slow pace, is just like this weird Frankenstein's monster of a team. You also brought up, you say you listen to the podcast, so you're obviously aware of me repeatedly saying Gary Trent Jr., his gambles are measured by proprietary scouting companies. And he, as far as allowing points on gambles across the NBA, he's very, very bad. He ranks really, really highly. So that's like an interesting calculus thing too, that I haven't been able to look at as like it scales across the season, just at certain points. And then on top of that, you alluded to Pascal being at the center of so much happening defensively. And I know you have, a decent idea of analytics, catch-alls, and that kind of stuff. And I did want to ask, why do you think this year there's such a big disconnect between how you and I and many people perceive Pascal's defense, meaning to be like paramount to how the Raptors succeed, and why he's not really recognized by defensive catch-alls and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think without knowing the formulas that actually go into some of these catch-alls, like I'll be perfectly honest, like some of them, I try not to use the ones that I don't understand, just because I think that's a little bit dishonest in a way, to just like to take this shorthand to prove a point that you want to prove when you don't actually know what's going into it. And then when it doesn't line up with what you think about a player, like in the case of Pascal, you just cast it aside. So my sense is that like a lot of what those metrics are capturing is like box score stuff, which like Pascal, for as great a defender as I think he is, like he doesn't exactly stuff the stat sheet on defense, right? Like he gets a decent number of steals, but he doesn't block a ton of shots. And I think, probably the team's rebounding rate when he's on the floor is like below 50%. I don't think he's a bad rebounder, but he is playing in this defensive scheme that often leaves the defensive glass unattended, or there's a smaller player under the rim and he's out on the perimeter. So I think that can make it hard to capture, where maybe like him being on court correlates with like bad defensive rebounding, even though it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with him. So I think maybe that's part of it, but I feel like his defensive on-offs have always been quite good, right? So I would expect that to factor into some of the defensive metrics. Like I know this season, like RPM rates him really highly on defense, whereas like Raptor rates him negatively. And I just don't understand enough like the actual difference and what's going into creating those numbers and spitting them out to say like why that's actually happening. But I don't know. I mean, if you have a theory, I would love to hear it, because it's really confusing to me.
It's basically the same thing as you, is where, well, as you said, he doesn't, like Gary Trent Jr. is being measured or is providing defense in a way that is just measured. And his failures aren't measured as a result of his failures. Those failures are measured as a result of the team's failures. Like if a point is scored on a possession, if you're taking from box score statistics and kind of cooking up this number at the end that says defense good, defense bad, or whatever, or it has a percentile that it puts you in, Gary's gamble could only ever result in positive defensive numbers, or as far as how it weighs for the negative and weighs for the positive. By the numbers, it's always a great play for him to try and get a steal, because that'll be recognized in an outsized way relative to the gamble he's making. And then Pascal is the guy who is like, for the longest time was recognized as, okay, I am chaos, an agent of chaos defensively and offensively. I fit in this way next to guys like Kyle, Kawhi, etc. But now basically what he does best at the defensive end of the floor is to extend offensive possessions for the other team by mitigating their set actions and making them move to something else. That's not something that's ever really recognized. And so a lot of his most impressive plays, where it's this closeout that comes out of nowhere that makes them reset with like 8 seconds left, right? That's just not recognized as his thing above the team's thing. And it never ever will be. Well, it depends on, how much tracking data or that kind of stuff is baked into these numbers.
Right.
But I think that's probably mostly it.
Yeah. And I mean, again, without knowing what exactly these metrics are capturing, I can't say if this is part of it, but also he is, like in most of the Raptors lineups, like a nominal big man, regardless of what position he's playing on offense, which a lot of the time is like point guard. On defense, he's like one of, if not the tallest guy on the floor. So are those numbers seeing him as like the center or the power forward in those lineups? And then looking at the fact that like the Raptors are kind of getting shredded at the rim. And if you look at, his numbers defending the rim, it's like not particularly impressive for somebody who ostensibly plays that defensive position. Like maybe that's part of it too.
Yeah, it could be. It's like in baseball, defensive WAR, the way it's cooked up, defensive numbers is like a third baseman. If you just play closer to the line, you're going to have a better defensive WAR, even though it might negatively impact your team because, keeping balls from going down the line, i.e. doubles, is like a huge plus the way it's measured for that. And then, if you're getting stuff going into the gap, it might negatively affect the shortstop instead or something like that. Or it becomes a judgment call on the tracking data, that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Anyway, that's kind of just what I want to talk about. But let's move on to the two stars.
Well, sorry, can I actually just make a really quick point just about what you said about pace? Because I think it's not totally related, but just in terms of like the fallibility of some of these stats and the lack of context and what they fail to capture. Like, I think someone who hadn't really been watching the Raptors this season would look at that and think that they were this slow plodding team, which isn't at all the case. Like what I feel like that pace number is showing you is the Raptors get a ton of offensive rebounds, and that quote unquote slows them down because the average offensive possession is lasting way longer because they're getting multiple shots at it. And there's also, I mean, to be clear, like their half court offense is very slow because they just lack advantage creators. So what winds up happening is like they have to cycle through multiple actions and multiple handoffs and like weave action and all this stuff to just try and open up some seam. And that slows them down. But like on the whole, they're not a slow team, right? Like they are one of the highest transition frequency teams in the league. And if you look at Unpredictable is a site that actually tracks average time, like from the time the possession begins to the time that you take a shot. And in that stat, they're 16th. So like medium pace, essentially, which is balancing like the amount of time that they're actually running in the open floor with the amount of time it takes them when they're in the half court to get a shot off. So they're like kind of fast and slow at the same time.
Mm-hmm. A truly unique team. And so the next thing I want to talk about is the stars who have led them here. And certainly the Raptors have, the same way that their rim defense is democratic and by committee, their offensive process can also seem quite that way, especially early on in the season before Pascal turned into the best player in the world and they just set the offense on his shoulders. But that's kind of what I want to talk about right now is Fred's ascension in the first half. And, we don't have to get into the weeds of, the second half. He's dealing with injuries and he's been a much worse player. But the improvements he made to drive the team in the first half and be just this incredible winning player who, if he's on the floor, he wins minutes. And then the second half, Pascal obviously basically doing the same thing effectively.
Yeah. Okay. Was there a question in there? Or
Yeah. Just like, what are your thoughts on the first half of Fred's season? Like what made his jump? So like what made his jump something that happened? Like what did you perceive as how he improved?
Right. Two big things for me were the mid-range shooting and just sort of like in between scoring in general, which is something I've wanted to see from him for a really long time. And as the guy who was finally just like the unquestioned primary ball handler, it became very clear that he needed to do that more, and he did it. And he was really shooting it extremely well from like long mid-range, developed like a little bit of the floater game, although I think more of that was just coming from like the, more of like the 16 to 22 foot range rather than like the floater range stuff. But he was drilling pull-up mid-rangers, and obviously like the 3-point shooting has always been there, but I think the ability to scale it to the point that, he was taking basically 10 threes a game, a whole bunch of them were coming off the bounce, and he was still well up over 40% until the second half slump hit him. That was huge. And I think it's been incremental over the last few years, but the pick and roll playmaking, I think got a lot better. Like the pocket passing was better, his timing, his cadence, like all of that stuff. I just think he got a better feel for how to orchestrate the pick and roll. And, he's still not one of these like heliocentric pick and roll operators who like the offense is going to revolve around that and it's going to be like an exceptional half court offense. Like he's not close to that level still, but he elevated himself to a point where at least like he could be the engine of a competent half court offense. And I think that's just a credit to him constantly working to hone his game. And I think, the passing was part of that. The 2-point scoring for him is like really, really fallen off in the second half, along with the 3-point shooting, but even more so, I feel like it's been the 2-point shooting. And I feel like maybe early in the season, actually the rim finishing had improved a little bit. Like, I don't think that was ever what was driving it, but basically now you look at it, it's like back down where he's always been, pretty much like 52%. So I just feel like that's, at this point, I've resigned myself to feeling like that's always going to be an area of struggle for him. But if he can get back to the point he was early this season, where the mid-range is still like a viable weapon for him, then I think that becomes much less of a concern.
I think I was looking at it earlier today. I think cleaning the glass has him at 56% within 4 feet. And, other years, as you said, it's like 51, 52. I haven't looked at since December, what he's shooting in transition and versus half court. Because I remember there was a big disparity early on that he was really juicing his rim numbers by getting to the rim in transition. But as you said, like, how often is he getting to the rim now? It's like 8% of his possessions result in a shot within 3 feet of the basket currently. And last year that was even like 16%. It's way off the cliff. But 37 games into the season, 34 for him. He's shooting 44% from the field, 41% from three, and a 59% true shooting for 22 points a game and like 7 assists. And he's running pick and roll. He has that portion of the offense just unto himself. His playmaking is a little bit more dangerous as well. It's not as risk averse. He's starting to make those wraparound passes. He's starting to kind of play with the help side defenders a little bit more. He just was so good. And then post All-Star break, he's shooting 29% on catch and shoot threes and 29% on pull-ups. And the knee is very clearly bothering him. I don't know how much that gets sorted out, but for a guard of his size to be putting up 59% true shooting on such heavy usage, and also to be able to kind of take in stride all of the playmaking that came with his role, that was tremendous. That blew me away, dude.
Yeah. I mean, it was, and so much of it, I feel like, was just punishing drop defense to the point where, like, we really started to see a lot more teams throwing blitzes at him. And, that wasn't necessarily beneficial for his individual offense, but that was beneficial for the Raptors offense as a whole, I think. Although I'm of two minds about that, because I have seen over the course of this season, like, the stat bouncing around where, Fred and Pascal are like, what was it, like top 5 or top 10 in the league in terms of drawing double teams?
Yeah, and Fred. I believe that Pascal is either, but he's in the top 7, I believe, if not top 5 at the end of the season.
Right. So you can certainly say that part of that is because of Fred and Pascal, and like Fred, when he has the pull-up jumper going, you don't necessarily want to play drop against him. And, you want to do what you can to get the ball out of his hands. And Pascal, obviously, we've seen, like, can really get cooking from any spot on the floor, whether it's out of the post, whether he's facing up, if he's in the mid post. Like, I think he's a dangerous enough scorer that a double team is warranted a lot of the time. But I would also say that those statistics, like, say as much about, like, the rest of the Raptors roster and like the shooting deficiency more than anything as they do about those two guys. So it's a little bit of both.
Okay, let's do Pascal now. Probably going to make an All-NBA team.
I mean, I really hope so. He deserves it. 1,000%. So I think there should be, the way he played. I mean, obviously, like, the whole second half, but just specifically, like, the last maybe 6 weeks of the season, when Fred has really been laboring, like, it's been on Pascal to carry the offense night after night after night. And to be able to do it with zero drop off in efficiency. Like I think his efficiency has honestly like improved over these few weeks while he has like continued to carry a heavier and heavier load and see more and more defensive attention. It's kind of crazy. Like I know you point this out all the time, right? Like he just sees bodies upon bodies, and his ability to navigate that and just make the right decision time after time. And sometimes the right decision isn't necessarily to pass the ball, right? Like sometimes that decision is sort of just to like wait out a double team and then just go and score the ball himself because he's the only one who can do it. And that's what the team needs in that spot. Like, and obviously like the playmaking has been there, but I feel like to me the scoring has been maybe the most impressive part of it.
He ended up at the end of the season leading the NBA in minutes per game, 37.9, 49%, 49.4% from the field, 34.4% from three, which all things considered, not so bad. And he did get the free throw shooting up to 75% after it hung around like between 67 and 70 for some time. 8.5 boards. The defensive rebounding has been huge this year. His contested rebound rate has just been incredible, and the 5.3 assists. And as you said, these assists could be ballooned up to as high as like 6.5, because you're looking at a guy who, for so much of this season, OG's not available. That's a 40% catch and shoot 3-point shooter for a guy, to play next to a guy who gets doubled at this frequency. And the second half of the season, post All-Star break, well, I guess like second, I don't know, the third of the season post All-Star break, Gary, this dynamite shooter, is shooting like 26% from three. Fred is shooting 29% from three. This is a guy accessing spaces on the court via wormhole and just like getting to a million different spots on the court that he has no right to be in. And then taking all of the difficult shots that, a less than ideal offense supplies stars with, and just making those instead. Like taking all the difficulties of the context and then deciding I'm going to thrive within these. It has been a remarkable season. It's hard to put into words the way he plays. It's completely singular in the NBA right now.
Totally. And I think, man, he has become very reliant on that push shot, from like 8 to 14 feet, I'll say. And it's just been money for the last few weeks. Like that makes such a difference for him. And like, just the straight up mid-range jumper has been there too. But just when he gets below the free throw line and gets a little bit of space and is able to get that push shot off, like he's just knocking it down. And it's hard to overstate, I think, how much of a difference that makes for him, because like that space is just pretty much always available to him, because like teams are going to want to defend against the drive against him. He is a powerful driver. He's fast. He has, contrary to popular belief, a pretty decent set of post moves. So I think the defense is still going to try and bottle him up in that in-between space. And he's just been taking what the defense has been giving him. Like he has a real mastery now, I think, of that in-between space. And that doesn't necessarily have to be scoring. Like we've talked about his inside out passing and what he's able to do, the reads he makes from the middle of the floor. Like he's just controlling that space right now and doing it at his own pace. Like it's almost DeMar-like in how unhurried he is right now. And I think that was one of the things when he was sort of trying to find his footing as a number one scorer where you could speed him up. And I feel like that's just not happening right now.
Yeah, the point you make when you're talking about outfoxing doubles, outweighting a double, or maybe using like an escape dribble and you re-engage. Those even on a pick and roll, right? If they blitz or if they're trying to switch, anything like that, just waiting. Not having to attack right away completely changes how defenses want to defend those. And you put them in a position where, okay, maybe they think they can catch up now and try and play it straight up. And then you attack during that indecision. Like those types of plays that is the home of stars. 100% is attacking indecision in aggressive schematic decisions, that kind of stuff. And he's gotten so good at it. And then, as you said, in the short mid-range, between 4 to 14 feet, that's 37% of his overall shots. And he shot 49% on them this year. And a lot of them are under duress because those are contested shots, yes. But they're also, as you said, those are the shots that teams are going to give up because what else are you going to take away? This is where you put people when you want them to fail, and he's succeeding. It's remarkable, really. And then as far as like managing his time and getting into the middle four, like, DeMar, and then managing the middle of the floor, those lanes that are available to him as a passer is a very underrated thing because we think of, well, why does Embiid fail sometimes against the Raptors when they played Gasol? Sure, Gasol is big. He knows Embiid. But why did Embiid fail against the small Raptors team then? Because Embiid is a lesser passer than Pascal, and he didn't manipulate the lanes. The Raptors double, they load up, and they present him with lanes, and he takes the lanes that they want, that they give up, and that they're comfortable recovering to. And Pascal doesn't take the easy lanes that defenses give them. He works for the more difficult ones that are more rewarding for his teammates, whether it's, a lay down to somebody for a layup or playmaking to above the break instead of the corner to create a more open shot. It's just playing and manipulating the second level of the defense. He's talked about it all year in his, post-game stuff about how I don't look at my primary defender. I'm looking at the second level. And the fruit of his labor, I think everybody's eating from it.
Yeah, and I think, he's obviously not all the way there, but I feel like the kind of final stage, like the last evolution of a player's playmaking abilities is like you're not reacting to a defense. Like you're making the defense do what you want them to do. And I feel like he's doing that more and more. Like he's not doing it with the consistency, obviously, of like the best playmakers in the league. Like if you watch Jokic, it's literally like every possession he is just like moving the defense into the spots that he wants to move them into. But I feel like that is something that Pascal's getting better and better at. And it's just been really cool to see his growth this year, and especially because I mentioned this throughout last season. I felt like his last season was really unfairly maligned, and so much of what was disappointing about it was just the 3-point shooting, and it sort of masked a lot of these subtle improvements that he had made in other areas of his game, and I think playmaking first and foremost. And so it's been really cool to see now that like the scoring efficiency, even the 3-point shooting to an extent, and especially the mid-range shooting has really come back up. The touch around the rim is back to like 2018-19 levels almost. Now we've really gotten to see those playmaking improvements shine, especially because of the attention that defenses are having to pay him as a scorer.
Mm-hmm. He's the type of player who you can't emulate or recreate on NBA 2K because his job is too difficult. Like Steph Curry, you couldn't play like Steph Curry in video games. You couldn't play like DeMar DeRozan in video games because video games have to make sure that the person controlling the player actually does good things to reward themselves. And Pascal, DeMar, Steph Curry in a different way, the shot making is too difficult, and they've specialized in this unique way that it's like, oh, yeah, the video game, if it rewarded people who did this, it would just be stupid. It's like spammy. It's impossible to stop because how do you take away that spot on the floor? And that's how Siakam has become video gamey in like the best way possible. Yeah. As you said, it would be great if he was rewarded with all NBA. But before we get into the second half of the podcast, which we'll be talking about Scotty Barnes, Precious Achiuwa, which obviously is going to be a blast of a conversation between us, and some other unique aspects of the team, OG Anunoby's year as well, and the ups and downs that's come with it. An ad read for you, listener, and a quick one. So, want to get to the top of your game? Jack Health at www.jack.health is an online service for men's health that handles the doctor's appointment, the prescription, and the shipping, which, by the way, is free. All you need to do is stay home and relax. They've got stuff for sexual health, daily health, hair and skin, you name it. Order what you want, fill out some questions, and get it shipped straight to you. Skip having to lay out all your medical issues in the clinic waiting room and keep your private business private. Free shipping and easy prescriptions. Boost your game and do it all from the privacy of your own home at www.jack.health. Okay, now that we're all set up with our sexual health and daily health, Joe, let's talk about the health of Scotty Barnes' rookie year and his rookie of the year candidacy. Just the cliff notes of Scotty at all so far.
I mean, offensively, like he's been the best offensive rookie in the league this year, to my mind. Mm-hmm. Just what the Raptors have sort of asked him to do in spots, like the self-creation, his willingness and ability to just kind of like take the ball into the post and go and get a bucket. I mean, he just goes in and scores over centers like a lot of the time. And I just like his individual offense, like the one-on-one scoring, his ability to conjure baskets out of thin air has been maybe like the most impressive thing to me. And, you know, the playmaking in transition has been there pretty much from the start of the season. I feel like it started to level up in the half court a little bit as the season went along, especially, you know, when they started kind of using him a little bit more as like a high post operator, a handoff hub. And I've always liked that look because the option to have him just keep the ball was always super dangerous. Like from the moment I saw him do that against the Sixers in the preseason, I was like, oh, that's super interesting. So great in that respect. You know, the offensive rebounding we touched on, a maniacal offensive rebounder, especially when he's chasing his own misses. Plays really, really well out of the dunker spot. Just like a great sense for how to operate in that space, how to relocate. And I just feel like a lot of the time, like the ball just like finds him in advantageous spots. And, or like, that's maybe the wrong way to put it, because he is the one who is making that happen. Like the ball finds him because he knows where to be. Really, really impressive offensive season from him. I am super curious and excited to see where his career goes from here, because I feel like it could branch off in any number of different directions. And I feel like that's the coolest thing about him is like, I still, after watching him for this entire season, don't know what type of player he's going to be. And I think that's really cool. I mean, I think defensively, it's been a real adventure for him a lot of the time, but he has tamped down some of his spacier impulses, I think, later in the season. Like, I think his off-ball defense has certainly improved. Mm-hmm. I know you still have some qualms about his on-ball defense, which I like completely agree with. But it's a little bit of what you're talking about with Trent, right? It is like pretty high risk, high reward. And I think as a rookie, like you're pretty willing to live with that and live with the trade-offs, especially because I do think at the end of the day, even in this sort of mistake-prone state, he fits the Raptors scheme quite well.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Is that, and that's the same thing with Chris Boucher as well. Like Chris Boucher has made he's made more positive decisions in the Raptors scheme. But a big part of the reason why this year is so demonstratively his best defensive year ever is because a lot of the mistakes that he casually makes as a defender are papered over by the scheme. It's why Delano Banton got minutes with the Raptors when on, I don't know, 25, 26 other teams, he probably would have just been a G League guy. It's what about you is forgiven in the scheme, and what about you enhances the scheme, and what is the calculus that the Raptors are kind of running for how you fit in. And Scotty, especially, you talked about him, you know, tamping down some of his spacier inclinations, let's say, or proclivities. He's now at this, like at the end of the regular season, I believe, the Raptors defense was better with him on the floor than with him off of it. And that is just a crazy thing to say, given where it was at one point in the season and the bevy of mistakes that he was making. Like he's turned it around to such a degree with himself, but also it's just that he fits the Raptors defensive ethos. And then as you talk about, offensively, this guy is just completely unique. There isn't anybody who operates the way that he does. You cannot stay in front of him on defense. He's going to bowl you over, or he's going to hop step around you. And it could be both of those things at the same time. You just don't know which it's going to be, even for centers, as you said. How he deals with being gapped defensively and how he deals with kind of shading, that's still very much a work in progress. And as you said, like the playmaking in transition is clearly so high level, but in the half court, there's still steps to be made, especially since we know he makes reads at such a high level. Just waiting to see more permutations defensively so he can, do the neuroscientific chunking so he understands what reads come here, what reads come there. But a fantastical rookie season wherein he did a million things that people either said he wouldn't do or wouldn't do right away. And that's the best way to describe his season so far, is just an absolute surprise, even in the ways that, it's not a surprise. He's still surprised. It blows my mind.
Yeah. And just like a really simple thing, but a really important one, incredible touch around the basket.
Yes.
I mean, like the angles that he is able to put the ball in at, using the backboard, and he too, I think, has like a pretty solid push shot, but I think he uses the glass a lot more than Pascal does. And I'm frequently shocked watching Raptors games at the kind of contorting layups or floaters that he's able to put in the rim, because when they leave his hand, they look like they have no chance, but he's managed to find some angle. And that is one of the most impressive things about his offensive profile so far to me, is if he is catching the ball anywhere in the vicinity of the basket, I feel like there's a pretty good chance that he's going to put it in.
How do you time up his shot as a shot blocker, right? Because he's starting his shot with his back to you and he's not fading away. He's going, he'll nearly kiss you on the lips, dude, as he's shooting the ball. He's going to jump directly into you. And it's like his shoulders, the front of them, are magnetized to the rim. He will square up at any cost. And the bottom half of him flails around. He goes perpendicular over defenders, and still Statue of Liberty off the glass, soft as hell. It falls in. It is one of the most unique scoring packages in the NBA. And I can't really square it. I can't make sense of it. You just have to kind of sit back and say, this is a unique thing and it exists in this form. Will it exist in this form forever at this rate? Who the hell knows? We don't typically see this. This is his thing, but my God, Rookie of the Year. What are your thoughts? If you had, you don't have to say who you're going to vote for because you don't have a vote, I don't believe, but you don't have to say who you would vote for, but who do you think will win?
No, it's okay. I mean, because I did this on Pound the Rock with Cash last week. So I've already put it out there that I think that I would give Mobley just the slightest of edges. And I know that's not going to make people happy listening to this podcast. I think it's so close. You're splitting hairs. I have no issue, obviously. I'd be thrilled for Scotty to win it. I just think if you were putting it to me and me just putting on my most objective hat and trying to think through it, and this is what I said on my podcast, you have to take the entire season in totality. And for the first half of the season, I just think the gulf between them was so vast at the defensive end, it outstripped the gap between them on offense. So I look at Mobley and I'm like, that guy really helped completely transform the Cavaliers defense. And he's doing it in conjunction with Jared Allen, and to a much lesser extent, Isaac Okoro, but really those two guys were the bedrock. And it's hard to separate one from the other and say who's the most important defender. Obviously, their defense fell off when Allen got hurt. So that made people think he was the one who was driving it. But I think it was really them doing it together, and they fed off of each other. They covered for each other and allowed each other to do all kinds of different things, to play up higher on the floor, to switch, to freelance a bit, because there was always one guy behind them who could cover off for any mistakes or any slippage. And like that just made them really, really tough to score on. And I think, Mobley was, I would probably say Allen was like a touch better and more important as a defender than Mobley this season, but really close. And I think that matters. Like it matters that for the first half of the season, Evan Mobley was, in my mind, like borderline all defense caliber. And that Scottie Barnes was like, a space cadet who was harming the Raptors defense on more nights than he was helping it.
Mm-hmm. That's I really don't like the arguments that people make where it's like, well, actually Scottie is pretty much as good defensively as Mobley, because look at this matchup data. It is so incongruent with how defense works in this day and age. Like, the Giannis Antetokounmpo, why doesn't he switch out onto this guy and like slap the floor and guard him in isolation? And it's like, well, Giannis is 7 feet tall and he's super effective around the rim. Why would you put him out on an island with like, Trae Young or Tyrese Maxey or something like that, just because you want to see like this visceral version of defense because you don't understand scheme? Why does that mean a star player has to do it to be recognized by you? Like that type of thing. But the case that you made like off the jump, where Scottie is the best offensive rookie, and Cade certainly because of how difficult his job has been, and this is the case I made when I was on Kevin O'Connor's podcast, and I said Mobley was 1A and Scottie was 1B, but Scottie still had time, is that, Cade has the hardest job by far. And Scottie's job is significantly harder than Mobley's, but Scottie also has the benefit of significantly less attention defensively than Cade. Like Scottie isn't really going to get doubled. Cade is going to get doubled and does quite often. But I still think Scottie found the line in between Mobley and the line in between Cade and rode it as best he could. He started correcting so much of what needed to be corrected towards the end of the year defensively. Basically what we've talked about so far in this conversation, that if I had a vote, I would be really, really tempted to cast it for Scottie. Although I don't know if I would give it to Scottie or Mobley, but I just really hated the defensive conversation around those two, because the defense still isn't close. But the point you want to make in Scottie's favor is that Scottie just completely outpaces him on offense. And I think that's correct. But yeah, I don't know who I would vote for. I think I have them even currently. So I'm the coward. You came on my podcast and you did the brave thing, and I'm doing the cowards thing. How does that sound?
I mean, fine, I guess. I can be the bad cop, I suppose, in this scenario. Like it just doesn't, like I'm a Raptors fan. Like I have a job where I cover the entire NBA and I try to do it as objectively as I can. I think I try and succeed in being objective about the Raptors when I write or podcast about them. But the Raptors are still my team. So like, I want them to succeed. I want their players to have success. I want Scottie Barnes to have success. I would love for him to win Rookie of the Year. But I also just like can't really be bothered to care that much about this particular award, because I'm just like so thrilled with the season that Scottie Barnes has had and the way that his arrival and what he already is as a player has changed the trajectory of this franchise, that like, we're not like 5 years down the road, like who's going to care like whether or not he won Rookie of the Year, So like, I've seen people getting in a huff about it. And I think it's just really small-minded thinking. I'm sorry to say, like, I know we all want him to win the award because we all love Scottie and it would be great for him, but it's not like some great injustice if Mobley wins. And I don't think it's some great injustice for somebody to say that Mobley deserves to win over him. it's going to be water under the bridge because Scotty's going to be an unbelievable player for a really long time, and hopefully he's going to do that wearing a Raptors uniform. So like that feels like the more important thing to me.
This is what I'm about to say is absolutely, sorry to annoy the listener perhaps, but this is not basketball whatsoever. This is online basketball culture, and stan culture has really ramped up how much people care about the Rookie of the Year award. Like Michael Carter-Williams' career did not go any better because he was given that award. But whether Scotty wins or not, he could very well be an all-star on a rookie contract and just like an out-and-out superstar in the future that completely changes the way that the Raptors build their team going forward. And all that stuff is like way more important than however the votes shake out. And Scotty obviously wants to win. That makes sense. And for his sake, I hope he does. But yeah, the conversation around it, I've never seen it this juiced up. And I am really interested to see like how this kind of stuff develops going forward, since you and I operate in the public sphere and our opinions are there for constant, I don't know, not attacking, but constant criticism or intake. So I'm very always interested in how that's kind of playing out. So, but anyway, Gary Trent Jr., next guy, has made significant steps in Kem Birch's words. I've never seen a guy go from being bad at defense to good at defense like that. And truly, Gary Trent made very modest gains as an on-ball guy, and not even in the gambles in passing lanes kind of way, but there are low gamble steals that he makes all the time just by being a ball pressure guy and having incredible hands. And there is no, he's gambling, because he never gets called for fouls, like ever. It's incredible. That's a huge plus. And then offensively, honestly, he hasn't made that many improvements from last year to this year, by my mind. But I'm curious what you think about his year.
I'll start with a question back to you. Is Gary Trent a good defender?
No, I wouldn't say good. I would say he's had an above average year. Uh-huh. And that's where I would sit, but I would not say good.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember being on this podcast last year and we were talking about Chris Boucher and where we fell on that. Like, is Chris Boucher a good defender? And I feel like where we landed was he's exactly average, which is funny because you think about calling, somebody average because they're like unremarkable. They don't make mistakes, but they don't make plays. It's sort of like a baseline. Whereas Boucher was like the opposite. Like he was average because he could really make plays, but he could also completely unwind your defense by making big mistakes. And I feel like that's sort of where I'm at with Gary Trent as well. Like the highlight plays, like the plays really stand out because they're swing plays. Like they affect the team at both ends of the floor. Like he gets a pick six and that's just a massive, massive swing. And I don't know, like, how do you quantify that, right? Like if you hit on like a gamble and it winds up with like a steal and a breakaway dunk, that's like, in a way, like a 4-point swing. You've taken a possession away from the opponent and gotten an offensive possession in which, if it's a clear fast break, it's like, what's the point? The points per possession on that, it's close to 2 points per possession. So I don't know how to, like, if you're actually just trying to quantify it, like where he would come down on the ledger, I would imagine that he would be on the positive side of things. Yep, just because of that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I think you just sort of, it's kind of like what we were saying with Scotty, what you were saying with Boucher, like you just sort of learn to live with the mistakes that come as a result of some over exuberance, over aggressiveness, gambling, all that stuff. And I'm, you may remember in that piece that I wrote early this season, I actually talked to him for that story. And he was saying that he, most of the time anyway, he's not just gambling to gamble. It's the result of like preparation, and game planning. The coach is calling out from the sideline what plays the other team is running, so he has an idea of whether he's going to be able to, to jump a pass, whether a guy's like coming off a screen and the ball's going from the point to the wing. Like he has some sense of what's coming. So it's kind of maybe more of like a calculated risk than it seems like on the surface. So I think he's an entertaining defender to watch, if a frustrating one at times. And I think, offensively, he has made some very small and subtle improvements. Like he's getting to the free throw line more. I feel like he is getting, I don't know if I would say downhill, but he is kind of like wriggling his way closer to the rim with more frequency. Like, do you feel that way, or you just think it's still like so jump shot dependent?
So I understand what you're saying. By the numbers, that's not accurate. But okay. Well, right, like he's getting to the rim less than he did last year. And 13% of his shots are at the rim, between 0 to 4 feet currently. But also in clutch time, in these high leverage positions, we're seeing more and more that he's leveraging how much players want to contest his 3-point shot into downhill momentum. And I think he can't really be asked to get anywhere downhill in a lot of the early parts of the games. But I think that he has made, and this speaks to improvement in process, but not necessarily in result, in the higher leverage points of the game, like late in the game, he's definitely able to put a couple dribbles on the ground and put pressure on the rim. It's not an incredible amount of pressure. He's still not a good finisher there. And like, he doesn't have the athleticism to really pop off in that way. But I think what you're seeing is, definitely a development that's the result of improvements. It's just we're not seeing it pop off by the numbers yet, but it's happening in important times. And that's a really, really big deal, and also could loom quite large in this series.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to separate like what Gary Trent Jr. is as a player in a vacuum from how much the Raptors rely on him and how much they need what he brings. So you like, I just like, I can't separate those two things because I don't know, like in a vacuum, is he a positive player? I'm not really sure, but like he is so necessary for this particular Raptors team. And so in that sense, like, he's been a huge boon. Like his shot making and his shooting gravity has been so necessary. And you've seen what it looks like when his jump shot is off, right? Like the half court offense is such a slog. They rely on him a lot. And it's a little bit scary, like the extent to which they rely on him, because there are downsides to that too. But I think for the most part, like he's come through for them this season. And you mentioned him doing it in the clutch and like him doing it in isolation, right? I think he is the most efficient isolation scorer on the team. I'm pretty sure I saw Lewis mention that in his preview today, actually.
He definitely is. Yep.
Yeah. So he's bailed them out a lot of times when they've needed him to. And it's regardless of, I guess, how you feel about him as a player in a vacuum, I think it would be hard to say that he, relative to expectations, has had anything but like a really positive year. Yeah,
totally. That's the biggest thing is like he's made improvements, although I don't know. I say these things because of the conversation around him. And that's kind of the idea, right? Is that the package and the way in which he scores at times is that of a superstar, or at least parts of what a superstar would do, but he absolutely doesn't have it in other ways. And then people are like, well, this guy is like an offensive superstar in waiting. And it's like, well, to score like 22 points a game, he has to shoot like he's Kevin Durant. And he's not Kevin Durant. And that's for 22 points a game. And so you're looking at a guy who the Raptors are extremely dependent on, and he succeeded because the number one thing that Gary Trent Jr. can do isn't the step back 18-footer that is like, wow, he saved that possession. It's great when it's happening. Sometimes it doesn't. The best thing he can do isn't getting downhill in clutch time. The best thing he can do is shoot 40% on the catch and shoot opportunities that he gets and especially above the break, because the Raptors have very few shooters who can actually hit from above the break, and he saves their spacing. Like, he is so essential to all the quirks and rhythms of how they affect defenses. And him not shooting, like him shooting like below 30% since the All-Star break has put just this incredible weight on Pascal's shoulders. Same with Fred. And you've seen what it looks like when they don't have anything else going. And if Pascal wasn't playing out of his mind, it would have been like super depressing to watch the Raptors play, like borderline unwatchable. But when he is shooting and it can scale accordingly, like when I talked to Blake on this podcast in February, I think we came to the conclusion that his mid-range contemporaries were like Devin Booker, Seth Curry, and Kevin Durant. And that's how good he was. He was shooting like 50% from the long mid-range. Now he's shooting 41%. And that's totally acceptable. It means he shot really bad to get back to 41%, but it's also totally acceptable on the season. Like, his contributions over the course of the season, as high or as low as it has come, I'm totally willing to accept the variation of the mid-range and have it fall anywhere, as long as that 3-point shot stays steady on catch and shoot opportunities and, is in a decent place off the pull-up. And he's done that, along with being an above average defender as far as impact. All those things collectively mean spacing, mean offensive punch, and mean defensive punch. And what you get at the end of all of that is a damn good player, honestly. That was long-winded. My apologies.
No, it's okay. I mean, he's a very interesting player in a lot of ways. And in terms of like what he means for this Raptors team specifically, because I feel like he's the player that I waver on the most. So it's appropriate, I feel like, to be long-winded about him, because you could talk yourself in circles trying to decide. I don't know. It's like that episode of Community when Abed is trying to figure out if Nicolas Cage is good or bad.
Yes.
Like, I feel like that's me with Gary Trent.
Let's talk about another huge impact player for the Raptors this year. The player who is most highly correlated with winning minutes defensively, with dominating defensively. The future perennial all-defense candidate, Precious Achiuwa. You and I, we are precious pilled, Joe. What are your thoughts?
Oh, man, I have so many. I mean, the defense is really high level. I think in particular, the ball screen coverage, like, it's so impressive. And I think the way I describe it is like, there's a real frictionless element to the way that he moves. If that makes sense. Like, like what I mean when I say that is like, momentum does not seem to mean as much to him as it would mean to like the average person or even the average athlete. Like, he's coming up, up to near the level of the screen or to the level of the screen. Like, the Raptors will pretty rarely, I feel like, play him in traditional drop, right? Like, he's
right.
They'll switch him out or he'll be up to the level, and like, he'll be coming up and like, you'll see a ball handler will sort of like start to go before he gets up there, whether it's like, rejecting the screen, or just kind of like, it's a slip, like he's exploding downhill, and like the ability of Precious to just like shift his weight and like slide with that ball handler without ceding any ground, like to get up and then get back down without getting beat is mind-blowing to me. Like, at his size, it's wild. So that is, to me, like the most impressive thing. It's just like in pick and roll, defending the screen, like great switch defender. But I think can play, I don't know, actually. I mean, I feel like, have you like noticed anything like, if like watching him just play, I guess, like conventional drop, like, do you feel like he can be effective in that way? Because I feel like that's not part of his repertoire just yet. But I feel like there are a lot of different things that you can do with him, and he's excelled at pretty much all of them.
So I have seen more well, okay, so not deep drop, just conventional drop. I've seen him play in conventional drop, and I've seen him succeed. Although it doesn't lean on his strengths, because conventional drop is you're kind of, and deep drop, you're saying this guy's big, and like you're keeping that size in proximity to the rim, and you're just saying like you're this big wall over there, and and then if people can make plays outside of that, then you get like Rudy Gobert, who's not just a rim protector, but he's a paint protector. Like he can just, patrol that area, being mobile and also being large. And Precious can do that, but he's not as effective because his standing reach isn't the same. And it's just, his movement is what makes him special. So put him in defensive situations where his movement allows you to kind of do things, as you said, like playing at the level of the screen, keeping up with guards, switching out onto a bunch of different guys, or even playing 3/4 court press on Giannis Antetokounmpo in a win, playing LeBron James in isolation, and quite literally not allowing anything that ends up with anything other than a jump shot, playing on Luka and taking the bump and not allowing it to go anywhere, playing on Jimmy, doing the same thing, just responding in kind with physicality of a big man without ever dropping the fluidity of a wing or guard is really what allows Precious to do things at that incredible defensive level. And then on top of that, just has a really great sense of timing for rim contests, and not as an incredible shot blocker, but as somebody who just changes shots all the time. And then just really a good leaper and gets his hands on defensive rebounds too. Just doing all of the things that correlate with good defense, and then doing the things that are really special that I don't know a defender like Precious Achiuwa in the NBA. I also don't know another defender like Herb Jones, for example, but I don't know one like Precious Achiuwa either.
Yeah, I mean, rare is the defender who can kind of bang with Joel Embiid, like deny him the ball in the post, and then also, maybe even on the same possession, right? Like if Embiid does manage to get the ball and it's like a dribble handoff, he can switch on to James Harden or even a Tyrese Maxey and keep up with them and force them into a difficult jump shot. Like that wasn't the most recent Sixers win, but the one before that was maybe the single most impressive defensive game I saw from a Raptor this year. Like he was incredible in that game. And I think he also dropped like 21 points in that game. So.
He did.
So yeah, looking forward to seeing what he can do in this upcoming series, because I think he's very, very important to that matchup. But yeah, I don't know, I guess another question for you, like, what do you think of him as a low man? Because I feel like, if I was an opposing team, I would be thinking like we should probably try to avoid this guy and not put him in ball screen action. Like we should try and isolate him on a side of the floor where he can't make an impact. And I feel like, that game you love to talk about against the Hawks, where the Hawks just sort of went ISO with Trey because going at Precious and pick and roll wasn't working. Like, I wonder if we start to see more of that, and if like maybe as a weak side helper, he's still not quite there.
The Kawhi Island stuff.
Yeah.
It's a good thing you brought up the Trae Young game, because otherwise you know damn well I was about to. Do I think that's something that will happen? Certainly, if a team wants to do that and they feel like they have the personnel on the other side of the ball to kind of make the Raptors pay. Like if they have guys they're not relying on screen and roll, then yeah, honestly, why wouldn't you keep Precious out of the play and kind of make him pay attention to and have countenance for weak side goings on, and like maybe an exit screen is set on him, right? And he's losing guys off ball, like all that kind of stuff where he's not as good defensively. I mean, yeah, but then you're already in a space where teams are just like, we attack offensively by trying to avoid Precious Achiuwa. And that is as big a compliment, in this conversation as we've spent the whole time being like, oh my God, he does all these things. And if we're coming to the decision, like, well, the best way to attack the Raptors is to avoid Precious. Like, that's just, if teams get there, it's not like the rest of the team is easy. It's OG, it's Pascal, it's hopefully Scotty someday. It's, Fred,
Right.
Gary, these guys. So that obviously enters the calculus as well. And yeah, I don't know how many teams would make that decision. Obviously, Trey, it paid off in the game where, the Hawks did. But yeah, I'd be really, really interested to see that happen. That would be totally fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, Maxey is the guy that I would worry about in the Sixers series. Like, he's the guy who can attack without a screen, who, I mean, we've seen in the games this year, like, the Raptors have a really hard time staying in front of him. I mean, everyone has a hard time staying in front of him. Like,
rapid in every sense of the word.
Yeah. So I think if that was going to happen, like, he would be the guy. Harden is not that guy at this point, even though I think in that game against the Nets, actually early this year, Harden was kind of cooking them at the point of attack, oftentimes just going without a screen. But like, he has not looked like that guy at all down the stretch of this season. So I feel like it might be Maxey, where you just give him the ball and be like, just break the defense, like, go one-on-one. And then maybe you don't have to do the high pick and roll thing. But
that would be interesting, because they'd be breaking hierarchy to try it out mid playoff series, which, oftentimes can be the right thing to do, but is really scary to try and put a team through, especially if things aren't going well. You say like James Harden, who we want to sign in the off season, it's Tyrese. Like, that's a big decision to make. And right. Tyrese has to do well when you do it too, which, I mean, Tyrese is really good. So who knows? But yeah, that would be really interesting.
Yeah. Especially if you think about, it's like James Harden isn't exactly like, forming up off of drives and like zipping around off balls. So, so yeah, maybe not. But anyway, Precious, super impressive defender. I mean, I can't say enough about his defense. And then obviously, like, in the back half of the season, like, has looked like a different offensive player. And the 3-point shooting has been instrumental to that, I think, in multiple ways. Mm-hmm. The biggest of which to me is, all the stuff we talked about early in the season about him not understanding how to interpret space, him getting in other people's way, and just not really understanding how to leverage the inattention that opposing defenders were giving him, like, and find open pockets of space and make himself useful. I just think that becomes so much easier when he can just sort of like drift and like find a pocket of space on the perimeter and hit a catch and shoot three.
He's a guard. It would be like if you asked a kid who played point guard, and obviously Precious isn't a kid, he's a very accomplished player. But even if you ask me, for example, when I lived in Mexico, and I happen to be quite a large person for Mexico, even though I played point guard my whole life, I went to this like semi-pro team and they wanted me to set screens and roll. I got to tell you, I sucked at it, dude. I was like, I don't know how to operate in this space whatsoever. I know I'm a ball player. I should be able to do anything, but I sucked at it. And Precious, the way he attacks closeouts with the handle, the way he drifts into space, the way he tries to isolate, this is a guy who's so clearly wired to operate in the offensive space as a wing or a guard. And he's definitely still doesn't have the timing, the pacing, and the awareness to work on the inside with as a role man and to do it well.
No.
But as you're saying, like, you hit the nail directly on the head. If he hits threes, it simplifies everything he does offensively to that 3-point punch and then attacking closeouts, which the 3-point punch obviously just ratcheted up to elite very quickly. Where it settles, who knows? And the closeouts have good and bad, but like he just became a positive offensive player overnight. It was outrageous.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been, I think primarily driven by the 3-point shooting and what that opens up, whether it is like he's no longer making those kind of gaffes off ball because he knows where to be, and now he's drawing closeouts and is able to attack them. But I think also, like, first of all, the finishing at the rim has been better. And I don't know what specifically to attribute that to, except just maybe like improving feel somehow with more reps, but like making just like more decisive moves, like quicker decisions in general. I think in the early part of the season, like him bringing the ball up the floor was an adventure that I wasn't happy really to go along with. But I feel like there have been more positive instances of that recently than negative ones. Like he's bringing the ball up, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen rather than just like dreading the inevitable mistake. I think he's been better in a lot of different ways, and his just overall progression over the course of the season, I think, has been one of the best stories on a team with plenty of good development stories this season. So really cool player.
And that 3-point shooting does allow you to kind of swallow mistakes, because the other game, I can't remember who it was against, he had 5 turnovers, and a lot of it was just like dribbling the ball away. Oh, actually, it was the second game against Philly, or the last game they played against Philly. He had 5 turnovers, and a lot of it was just like freestyling. But if you hit threes and people understand that, you're providing other things, finally, people recognize that he's like a really good defender, because it takes a while for the fan base to come around on defense. Like, especially if they see you as kind of this bumbling, dumb player, it's hard for them to believe that, you're good at defense. But it's been really cool to see Precious get like a longer leash, not only with the coaching staff, but with, public perception and stuff like that. And his floor is so high because of the defense that like anything he gives you offensively is just, as you say, he ends up as a really cool player. How he performs in the playoffs radically swings what the Raptors' fortunes are. Like if he can play 30 plus minutes a game in that Philly series, that's tough, because he's really going to bring it defensively too. And so that interests me to no end. But back end of end of rotation guys, Boucher, Thad, any thoughts?
I mean, you've talked about Boucher a lot this season. I don't feel like I have anything to add. I think he's been wonderful in his role. I was like really worried about Thad after his first few games, because he looked rough, like rough. And I was like feeling like an idiot for ever defending the trade and like being happy they got Thad. I'm like, this guy is washed. And he's completely turned that around, which has been great to see, especially, for me as a longtime Thad lover. So I'll just say that I think the Precious, Boucher, Thad trio has really been, one of the delights of this season for me. I love watching those guys play together. It's pure chaos.
You're a Thacolite, right? That would be the joke to make.
Yeah, I guess. Sure.
Okay. Yeah. That is incredible, right? That the Boucher Precious thing became a thing so much that I was very close to writing like this Boucher is the big man whisperer article, because Boucher next to any big man was turning out really well. But then I was like, no, just make it about Boucher. And it's, man, to see Boucher and Precious pop off and you're like, oh, it's working. And then to see Precious, Boucher, and Thad pop off and you're like, oh, it's working. You're like, what the hell? How do these guys find success? It's such a weirdo team. And yeah, seeing Boucher find success, I mean, I've talked about it lots. I've written about it a decent amount. He's just been tremendous. But Thad, I was in the exact same boat as you, where I was like, okay, they gave up quite a bit relative to what guys are getting traded for. I wasn't particularly pleased about what they gave up, but I thought, okay, Thad objectively is going to have something to give. That's a rotation piece, 100%. And then he wasn't. And I was like, oh boy, not only is this guy not providing a lot of the stuff I thought he might, the Raptors aren't using him in ways that he's typically been used in the past. And he's turning the ball over a lot. I was like, this seems super bad. But then all of a sudden, he snapped the fingers. He's defending guys in space better than Gary and Scotty do. And he's just becoming this immensely cerebral defender in the scheme. And that length and that grit and that tenacity is just, oh my God, this guy helps out so much. Like even the game against the Knicks, he was a plus 16. He had 5 points, 4 boards, and 3 assists. It's just the idea they had of Thad when they trade for him of just like plugging in obviously was the correct one. And what it looks like in the playoffs, I'm extremely excited for. But seeing this lineup they march out with just no point guard and it's just Pascal carrying the load. And then even to look at a bench that has Precious, Boucher, and Thad coming off of it, and basically nobody else, is fascinating. We haven't seen a team like this. It's truly unique.
Yeah. And by the way, with Thad, also wetting threes, like shooting 40% for three yes. after not hitting a single three with the Spurs this season. Like just a crazy development. I mean, basically, you mentioned the shooting struggles that both Gary and Fred have had after the All-Star break. Here come Thad and Precious, right? Like the two most reliable three-point shooters on the team post All-Star break. And somehow that works. I don't know. It's like got to be the weirdest team in the league by like several orders of magnitude.
Thaddeus Young, 45% corner three-point shooter. Like,
there you go.
Bet your life savings on it. That type of shooter, just absolutely outrageous. And after being classified as a big by cleaning the glass for like, I don't know, 9 years in a row, he is now a forward again with the Raptors. Just a fun little tidbit. And honestly, like Chris Boucher is probably really close to being labeled as a wing. You know, I think it's Basketball Reference. I think a lot of the places that go by, you know, like, oh yeah, what are you playing? Chris Boucher has played like a decent amount of shooting guard this year per their idea of what roles are and like positions are. Just those two plugging in has been so much fun. But yeah, we're at the end of it all mostly. Do you have any other fun things you like about this season?
Oh man, we covered a lot of ground.
we took some time, man, and we always do. I was very silly to think otherwise.
Yeah. It's actually not, I mean, it's tangentially related to the Raptors, but I'll just say that the Grizzlies are actually doing a lot of the same things that the Raptors are in terms of the possession stuff. And I'm super fascinated to see how that goes for them in the playoffs. And so I'm like, you know, I guess I'll spoil this. Like I'm working on a piece about it now because I wanted to, it's like pretty surface level. Like I'm not digging into film or anything like that. I mean, I've like watched a lot of Grizzlies this year. I wrote a big piece about Jaren Jackson Jr., who I think should win Defensive Player of the Year, by the way. But this is like strictly about numbers and figuring out, because I feel like there is this notion where the game becomes so fundamentally different in the playoffs. It's not up and down. It's a half court game. All these things that like, you know, certain types of teams rely on in the regular season fall by the wayside. And like the Grizzlies finished third in the league in offensive efficiency this year. If you look at cleaning the glass in terms of like their first shot, half court offensive efficiency, they're 22nd. Like that is absolutely insane to be 22nd in first shot, half court offense, and third overall. And they're doing it in like a lot of the same way as the Raptors are, which is just they absolutely pummel the offensive glass and they don't turn the ball over. And they play a ton of their possessions in transition. So does that stuff actually dry up in the playoffs? Like this is relevant to the Raptors too, right? Like does that stuff actually dry up in the playoffs, or is it actually like a constant? Is it something that carries over and can be sustainable? That's sort of what I'm trying to figure out. And I'm interested to see it from the Grizzlies because I feel like that might offer a window into what this could look like for the Raptors moving forward, because they are doing all these things. You know, they're dominating the possession battle to nearly the same extent, but they also have all these things that the Raptors so clearly and sorely lack. You know, an elite off the dribble shot creator in Ja Morant, a ton of guard depth in general, and like a legitimate, honest to God 7-footer who, you know, controls the glass at both ends of the floor. Like if the Raptors had those things, would they continue playing this style and having success with it? I feel like I look at the Grizzlies and it's not going to look the same for the Raptors. Like I don't think they're going to wind up with a player anything like Ja Morant. But I think it maybe is like a glimpse into the near future where it's like if the Raptors manage to acquire some of these things and balance their roster a little bit better or a little bit differently, what could that look like? And could that breed postseason success?
I affectionately refer to it as Hank Ball, because Henry Ward, who is now with Sports Info Solutions and does the podcast over there, but when his stuff was in the public sphere, he was like the biggest proponent of this style of basketball. And to see it, the Memphis, Miami, and the Raptors trot out a lot of the, I guess, the tropes of what I call Hank Ball, what most people call long ball. And to see them all succeeding with those things is like fascinating. And as you say, I use these playoffs as like a case study for where's the carryover when the game changes, do these things. That's awesome. It should be super fascinating. And I love that you have Jaren Jackson as a defensive player of the year. That was one of the qualms I had with public perception early on in the season when the Raptors lost to the Grizzlies. And everybody was like, oh my God, how could we lose to the Grizzlies? And I was sitting back like, wow, the Raptors just lost to a team that had an incredible performance, because Jaren Jackson Jr. said, if you're within 18 feet of the rim, you will do nothing and you will like it. And it's just been more and more of that this year. He's been nuts, dude.
Yeah, he's Mike Prada, who I really love, and who I think you had on your show actually recently. And it was just always great. He wrote a piece a few years back about Anthony Davis, where he called Anthony Davis the NBA's ultimate portable rim protector, because he was like protecting the rim at the rim, but also like away from the rim because of all the things that he could do to sort of stop the ball and prevent penetration on the perimeter. And like, that's now Jaren Jackson. Like, that's what he has become, I think, is like the NBA's ultimate portable rim protector.
You're never too far away from being an incredible defender when you have the tools, because Jaren was just not that great at defense. And now he's world ending. Blows my mind a little bit. He came out of college and everybody's like, yeah, he's going to be an incredible defender. And then he wasn't. And then all of a sudden he was coming off of flares and like pin downs, and he was getting handoffs, 6 feet above the break and hitting triples. It was like, well, maybe his career just looks different than we thought. And then he's like, oh no, the defense now. And just like, hell yeah, good for Jaren. His Low Post podcast was so good. He was so candid, man. I'd never heard a player do an interview like that, to be quite honest with you. He gave so much more than every question asked of him. He was so giving. God, what a thing. But Joe, do you have any parting shots?
No, man. I think at this point I'm tapped out. I don't even know how long we've been talking for, but it's been a while. I should probably get to bed. But I just want to tell you, I appreciate you having me on. I always enjoy our conversations immensely. And you don't need me to tell you this, I don't think, but you've done such incredible work this entire season, and it's been really cool to see it get recognized the way that it has recently. So.
Oh, thank you, man. That's incredibly kind. And as you say, like, you enjoy these talks. I do as well. Listener, do yourself a favor and make sure you follow Joe on Twitter. Is it Joey _W? Wait, Joey. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. I think that's a good place to put the podcast. But thanks for being so gracious and giving with your time, man. Obviously, this went pretty long. But anyway, I'll let you get to bed. I'll let myself do some editing and then bed. And we'll get out of here. Joe, thank you, man.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay. And listener, whether you got into this in the morning or at night, have a blessed day, and goodbye.